This video focuses on how variables are measured and the types of statistical tests that are used with different types of data. Measurement just means assigning a numeric value to something. If you've ever baked, done carpentry, gapped spark plugs, weighed yourself, or voted for prom queen, you're familiar with measurement. Measurement is particularly important in research because the appropriate statistical test depends in part on how each variable is measured. Here are some variables and how they might be measured. Party affiliation and interest in astrology represent a different type of measurement than lowest recorded temperature and height of 4-year-olds. Let's look at this difference more closely. There are two main types of data. The first is qualitative, or categorical. For this type of data, the values stand for categories. Political affiliation and interest in astrology are both qualitative variables. For political affiliation, the numbers assigned to each category are chosen arbitrarily. Republican, Independent, and Democrat could have been assigned any values. The numbers are just placeholders. For interest in astrology, there is a ranking to this interest, so the numbers should be assigned in increasing order. The numbers are otherwise arbitrary, so the actual values assigned do not matter. The other main data type is quantitative, or measured. Lowest recorded temperature and height of 4-year-olds are both quantitative variables. For this type of variable, the numbers assigned are meaningful. Unlike qualitative variables, the values of quantitative variables represent an amount of the characteristic being measured. Suppose a researcher is interested in the effect of different diets on weight loss in overweight adults. As an experiment, she would randomly assign subjects to one of the 3 diet regimens of interest. She would weigh each subject at the start and end of the study to determine weight loss. The independent variable is diet regimen. This is a qualitative or categorical variable. The numbers assigned to each diet would be arbitrary. The dependent variable is weight loss, which would be measured in pounds. This is a quantitative or measured variable. One way to think of the difference between qualitative and quantitative variables is to consider whether it makes sense to do calculations on the numbers. It is common to calculate a mean for quantitative variables, but a mean for a qualitative variable does not make much sense. With categorical variables, people sometimes confuse the variable with the values of the variable. In this example, the variable is diet regimen, which has 3 values or levels. Let's look at another example. A researcher wants to know if there is a relationship between undergraduate and dental school grade point averages. The independent or explanatory variable is undergraduate GPA, and the dependent or response variable is dental school GPA. In this case, both variables are measured. Here's a third example. Researchers were interested in whether there was a difference in survival by passenger class for passengers on the Titanic's maiden and only voyage. The independent variable is passenger class. The dependent variable was survival status. Both the independent and dependent variables are categorical. One last example. A study was done to see if aspirin had a protective effect on cardiac health. Healthy male physicians were randomly assigned to one of 3 aspirin dosages and monitored for several years. The main outcome of interest was incidence of heart attack. The independent variable is aspirin dose, and the dependent variable is incidence of heart attack. As with the Titanic example, this study has categorical independent and dependent variables. There is only one independent variable, aspirin dosage, which has 3 values or levels. Measurement is important because the statistical test that is used depends on how each variable is measured. Let's return to our examples and see what type of statistical test would be appropriate for each one. Example 1 has a categorical independent variable and a measured dependent variable. There are more than 2 levels of the independent variable, so the appropriate test is analysis of variance. If there were only 2 levels of diet regimen, the appropriate test would be an independent t-test. In the second example, both variables are quantitative, and the appropriate test is regression analysis. For the Titanic example, both variables are categorical. The statistical test is called a chi-square test of association, or independence. Both variables are also categorical for the last example, so the test would again be a chi-square test of association. If this were a real study, the researchers might try to control for competing explanations for results by taking into account such variables as obesity or tobacco use. These variables would then be factored out statistically by including them in the statistical test. This more complicated design is called logistic regression, which involves a categorical outcome with several independent variables called predictors. To summarize, measurement simply means assigning numeric values to a variable. The 2 main types of data are qualitative, or categorical, and quantitative, or measured. For qualitative data, the numbers assigned are arbitrary, whereas the numbers assigned to quantitative data reflect an amount of the characteristic being measured. Measurement is important in research because the way in which variables are measured determines in large part which statistical test is appropriate. When the independent variable is categorical and the dependent variable is measured, the appropriate test is either ANOVA or the independent t-test. When both variables are measured, regression analysis is used. And when both variables are categorical, the appropriate procedure is the chi-square test of association.